Okay, so there's a lot of information on the slides, not to overwhelm you, but to be like more of a reference for later, because we're going to talk about attachment and you can use that to go back and look, especially if you're dating or you're meeting other people. It's like the information on there is mostly to start to be like, oh, that person is that kind of attachment style and that person is that kind of attachment style. And when you understand someone's attachment style, it just gives you a better understanding of how to interact with them and what's going on in their world. And like, honestly, I could talk about today's topic for hours just because of my own personal experiences in the last 2 years, working from literally, I think what has happened is moving from an anxious attachment style to a secure attachment style, and my partner moving from an avoidant to a secure, and us figuring that out together. So I'm the kind of person that has to learn things by doing them. So something in my universe was like, oh, you're going to teach this? You got to go through it first. So I have a passion for this stuff just because of seeing how understanding this and thinking about my childhood trauma and the polyvagal theory, how that has shaped who I am today in my current relationships. It's like how we're raised and our attachment styles, I think, is a huge predictor of how we're showing up today in the world, not even just one on one, but also in big groups. So that's why there's a lot of information on the slides. It's more of a resource for you guys, but we'll go through it quickly. Let me
I have
find the
a
slides.
question.
Yeah, Paige.
Um, so I've been studying attachment style this year, and I keep running into different models.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean they all basically have like the avoidant and the anxious. But then there's ones that have quadrants. There's one I came across that was in the New York Times. That's like a more like a star, like an asterisk. Is that how you say it? um that has more on there. So anyway, what I'm asking is which one you base this class on, which one you like to use.
Yeah, so I really like this woman's name, and you'll see her quotes in my slides. Her name is Diane Poole Heller, or Heller Poole. I always get it backwards. And the reason why I chose to study her training or her school of thought is because she studied with Peter Levine, who is the somatic experiencing guy. And she addresses it from more of a somatic perspective. And she also addresses it from the fact of neuroplasticity, saying that our brains can change, meaning our attachment styles can change when we bring in a somatic perspective to it, which is why I chose her because obviously I do more embodiment and somatic. So a lot of her training, um, first you learn the basics and then starts to go into now how do we rewire the brain so that we can actually have lasting changes, which is why I choose her. So she has four main ones, and that's what we're going to go through today is the four main ones. And you might hear them called different names too throughout, and I'll bring that up.
Congratulations, by the way. That's challenging when you've got the dynamic that you had, and the fact that you're both coming closer to secure is really special.
Yeah, it's like, honestly, I'm like, how the fuck did we do that? So let me share my screen. It's going to be a mess for a second. Because okay. So here we have attachment theory and development for week 6. So this kind of gives us a layout of how we get so messed up with attachment or how we get so awry in our systems. So most people say developmental trauma occurs in the first 3 years of life. Some say up to the age of 6, because that's really when we're absorbing our world and our brains are developing. And with developmental trauma, we talked about this last week. You have a smaller brain overall. The right hemisphere just doesn't develop. You have slower motor development because, again, that part of our brain isn't developing. We have a lower IQ, and people behave younger compared to their peers. So, and we talked about in the polyvagal theory kind of what's going on with the brain with all of this. So, why does this even happen? So, there's epigenetics, which we're going to talk about today as well. There's pre and perinatal trauma, which we talked about last week, and that's how that polyvagal theory comes in with that bonding. And there's a lot of overlap with this. Unhealthy attachments. So that's what we're going to get into today. Unreliable neuroception. So this is something we talked about in week, gosh, I want to say 3, maybe 4. So neuroception is our ability to, I mean, we talked about it last week, actually. It's the ability for the implicit, so what's going on in our bodies, to then make it an explicit experience, or be able to go what's going from the inside into the outside. So if this gets screwed up because of epigenetics, polyvagal theory issues, unhealthy attachments, abuse, poor brain development, there actually might be people that just don't have the ability to understand what's going on implicitly and then make it explicit. And so the signals get crossed. There's also the unreliable interoception. So that's the ability of our sensory system, when we talked about our sensory system, and our ability to understand what our sensory system is telling us about the outside world, and how trauma can miscue that, or if we're just born with some sensory processing issues or disorders. And then social misengagement and misattunement, because if all of this stuff is not working and you go out in the world and try to communicate or be in groups or socialize, you're not picking up on the social cues. You're not understanding the way of the world. And so then there's misattunement, and then there's just like the feedback doesn't happen. This is kind of my cousins. When I say this with love, they were all kept at home. They weren't exposed to the outside world. They weren't exposed to a lot of other children. So whenever we'd get together with them, like I remember being little and being like, I don't know how to play with you, because there was the misengagement and the misattunement. Like they didn't know how to read me. I didn't know how to read them. They didn't know how to play with me. I couldn't figure out what was going on with them. So we pretty much just like stand there as children and like do nothing, because this is what was happening. So funny when you think about these childhood things. So let's talk about epigenetics. So this is like you're talking to someone and they have no signs and symptoms of childhood trauma or a troubled childhood. They're like, everything was great. I have healthy attachment. I didn't experience any big traumas. Like, I'm fine. However, and they have like a normal pregnancy and birth, which we talked about last week, but they show all the signs of childhood trauma, like PTSD, poor brain development, lower IQ. This is like actually a large portion of our population, I think. They have all those signs of trauma. So epi means above. It's not in the actual DNA, because we know that we pass things through our DNA. Epi means it's not actually in it. So what happens is that something is triggered by an outside, usually in the environment. So we're living our life, and then something happens in the environment, and it tells that gene to turn off or on. And then suddenly we have something happening. And I have a cute little video we're going to watch that explains it so well. So our genetic tendencies can be influenced and altered by their expressions due to outside stimuli or exposure, for example, and then it gets passed on. So children of Holocaust survivors are more likely to develop PTSD and other mood disorders, even if they personally did not experience trauma. War veterans and survivors of war, refugees and torture victims, and those who experience sexual abuse have the highest chance, like the biggest chances of passing on their traits down to their great grandchildren, great great grandchildren. These things, the survivors of war, sexual trauma, and refugees, have the highest predictive rate of epigenetic issues. And when I think about that, I'm like, well, we're all survivors of war at some point. Somewhere in our genetic line, I'm sure there was sexual childhood abuse, victim or refugee, or a survivor of war. Like that's why we're here, because our grandparents survived during war, or our great grandparents, or great great. So it's like all of us are kind of in this pool of survival. And so within that, in our system, we have this cellular memory of trauma and experiences, and we're like, but I've never experienced a trauma, or I've never had this thing. It's probably coming through your epigenetics. I think I have to maybe stop sharing. Let's see if this works. Last time I did this, it didn't. Can you guys see this little YouTube film? Okay. Now my internet's being slow.
The sweet smell of fruit doesn't normally send rats running.
Oh, come on, little rats.
But when researchers paired the orange cherry almondy scent of the chemical acetophenone with a painful electric shock, lab rats quickly learned to fear it. Along the way, extra neurons sprouted in their noses and in the smell processing center of their brains, making them super sensitive to the scent. This result isn't shocking. What is surprising is that the rats' pups and their pups' pups were also startled by the smell of acetophenone and had the same extra neurons as their fathers, despite never having been introduced to either their dads or the fruity scent before. But how could the pups have inherited something that their fathers learned? Basic genetics tells us that only DNA gets passed along to offspring. Characteristics like memories, scars, or giant muscles can't get passed on since acquiring them doesn't alter the genetic code. But it turns out that instilling fear in the rats did trigger genetic changes, not in the DNA sequence itself, but instead in how that code was read and used in the rats' bodies. In every cell, biological machinery constantly translates DNA into the proteins needed to carry out vital processes. Chemical switches attached to the DNA turn genes on or off or up and down, telling the machinery which proteins to produce and in what quantities. These switches, called epigenetic tags, are why a kidney cell looks and acts differently than a skin or nerve cell, even though all three cells have identical DNA. But the switches in any one cell aren't set in stone. Teaching those rats to fear the fruity smell switched one of their smell sensing genes into overdrive. Researchers don't know all the places in the rats' bodies where this switch got flipped, but they know it happened in one key set of cells, the rat's sperm cells, which would one day pass along the tweaked genetic material, making the next generation of rats super sensitive to acetophenone. Rodents aren't the only creatures demonstrating this weird type of inheritance. In Ivakalik, Sweden, boys who suffered through tough winter famines went on to have super healthy sons, with extremely low rates of heart disease and diabetes. And their sons had the same excellent health, living an unbelievable 32 years longer on average than the grandsons of boys who hadn't gone hungry. To be clear, this does not mean that we should start starving our kids for the benefit of future generations. Scientists don't even know yet exactly which switches the Swedish famines flipped. While we have been able to connect specific epigenetic changes to health effects in mice, we're a long way off from being able to make those connections in humans. That may sound like a bummer, but it's mostly because we humans don't live in the well-controlled environment of a laboratory. And for that, we should be grateful.
How cute is that video? I love it.
That's so funny that I have to look up the information I found out. Just last night we were talking about something around like the famines and how and some women, I guess it showed up where because they were so starved that the children's bodies ended up being grossly obese
Yeah.
in the next generations because they felt like they had to like retain the fat cells.
Yeah, I was telling my husband about this study and he's like, wait, they didn't get fat in the future generations? And I was like, yeah, weird, they live longer. Which I thought was interesting, but that's kind of the most famous study is the one about the rats. and the smell. And there's other ones that, with science, they like to produce the same results, but different tests. There's another one in the book, Come As You Are. It's a really good book if you haven't read it. And she talks about how they made them scared of cherry blossoms. And the daughters, the great granddaughters of the mice, were scared of cherry blossoms, even though they'd never been exposed to them. It's fascinating. All right, let me put this back in presentation view. Here we go. Okay, so pre and perinatal development, we talked about this a little bit last week. We go into it deeper in level 2, but essentially mom's stress affects developing brain. The HPA axis develops in the last trimester. The cortisol can go through the placenta, and that increases the baby's fight or flight system. So they're coming out with higher rates of a fight or flight system. So birth imprints from a stress response that is encoded in the body tissues and goes into the limbic system. So we have to start looking at pre and perinatal development, what's happening in utero, what's happening in birth, and shortly after birth. There's a study called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience. Have any of you gone online and taken this test? Okay, it's free online, and you can go get your score. It's like 10 questions. And the higher the number, the higher chance of trauma, the more traumatic experiences that you've experienced. And so they started to realize this correlation between the ACE study is what really started to switch things for psychologists and psychotherapists, realizing how important our childhood development is that affects the rest of our lives. So the thing that's crazy is that what they started to find, and they didn't know this wasn't part of why they started this study, but what they found is that the higher the score, the more likely you are to have chronic disease, mental illness, higher rates of missing work, and a higher chances of experiencing violence. Which is just like wild. There's no reason. There's this really amazing doctor who came along. She's alive today. She's a pediatric physician out of California. I actually think she's now California's, all of the state, every state gets a pediatrician or like a medical physician that oversees the states and makes decision and does laws. She's now that for California. She's an amazing woman. She's on a couple podcasts. I listened to the one on Goop where Gwyneth Paltrow interviews her. Fascinating. So she came along and she's an African-American woman, was working with children in poverty, really, really, really really low rates of poverty. And she started giving them the ACE study. And what she discovered is that it's not poverty. This was the thinking before she said this, is that it's not poverty that's causing the issues. Because that's how we've been thinking. Like if a child grows up in poverty, they're going to grow up and stay in poverty. They're going to be in jail. They're not going to contribute to society. And she found actually poverty has nothing to do with it. It's the ACE score. It's the child's amount of stress that they're experiencing. It's the child's amount of trauma they're experiencing. In fact, it's the largest predictor in adult physical and emotional health levels, is what we're exposed to as children. Because you can have a child that on the outside has a beautiful home, has all the food they need, they're getting all the education they need, but maybe they're getting sexually or physically abused. That's the largest predictor. Or they experience a trauma of some sort. So, and then you think about a child, so actually close to home, my sister's family experienced a trauma last summer. My nephew is 9, changed his world. Someone close to him died unexpectedly in a traumatic way. And I've watched over the last year, his whole system change. And luckily my sister's very aware. She's very educated. She's not in poverty. She has the resources to put him in therapy. He's getting EMDR. But you think about my sister's highly educated. She has access to these things, you think about my nephew or any of us who could have experienced a trauma. We are not getting, 20 years ago, there wasn't EMDR, there wasn't childhood psychologists, and there's a lack of childhood therapy right now. Like it takes months to get into therapy. So then we think about, well, why are all of us showing up with all these physical health issues? Heart disease. It's like, well, it's that childhood trauma that didn't get addressed, and we just didn't know it. So this is why Nadine, I think, what her work is showing, and is so important to start addressing our childhood issues, and therefore how we show up in the world and attach with other people. So we have to address the root cause. Yeah, go ahead, Paige.
It makes sense to me that if you had a difficult childhood, that you would have these chronic disease, the mental illness. The thing that kind of blows my mind is that you're more likely to experience violence.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Which, I mean, I understand that from a perspective of a vibration and attracting what you believe can and will and should happen to you. But isn't that wild? That one in particular.
That one in particular to me is super wild. I'm like, why? I mean, I get it if you experience violence as a child, that you might consider that that's the norm and then continue to have these relationships. But it's even true for like my nephew, right? If these issues weren't getting addressed, he would be at a higher risk for developing or experiencing violence as an adult. So wild. Like, talk about wanting to heal the planet and like transcend the planet. Like, let's just address our childhood issues. So attachment. We also have attachment. So I never know how to say his name. Bowlby, and Ainsworth. Do you know how to say it, Paige? No. Okay. So he was the first. He was this guy in the UK, and he had a nanny growing up, which was of the norm for richer families in the UK. He then was sent to boarding school. And he really started to look at himself and his own attachment style. And his big thing was like, well, it's all about the mom. It's all about how we are with our mothers and how much exposure we have to mothers. And he really was the first that started to look at that. Ainsworth is a female. She's here from the United States. And interestingly enough, she was doing a lot of research with kids out of, I think, Uganda, somewhere in Africa. And she, oddly, was doing the same research he was doing, and they didn't know each other. And then they met and they kind of came together. And people jokingly say that he's like the father and she's like the mother of attachment. Like, it's because of them that we got a lot of information. So essentially, attachment just means a deep, enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. It's not always mutual. Like, a baby could be very attached to the mother, and the mother's not necessarily attached to the baby. You could be really attached to your partner, and your partner's not necessarily attached to you. So from Bowlby and Ainsworth, then a lot of other people have come along and looked at attachment. But essentially, what Bowlby said is that we need to have a safe haven. This is what makes secure attachment. It's soothing and it's dependent on the caregiver. So we know that no matter what, without a doubt, our caregivers are safe. Secure base. We need at least a secure base, at least until the age of 5. So even as we start to explore out in the environment and get a little curious, we always know that we can come back to a secure base. Proximity maintenance, kind of what I'm talking about, is like, we can experience new things, but we know no matter what, when we come home, that our caregiver is going to be there. So even if we do go out and start to explore at the park, we know that our mom or our father is still, mom or dad is, or any caregiver is still back there. So because of that, I'm going to go explore a little more, which is what we need for development. And then there's actually a sense of separation distress, is that when you separate, you know that you're going to be okay when you're reunited, because you have proximity maintenance and a secure base. Even if you separate and it's distressful, like the child cries, you know that everything will be okay when they come back. It's like I used to babysit when I was probably way too young, and the kids cry when the parents first leave, and then you soothe them, and then the kids are really happy when the parent comes back. Typical separation distress. So again, we're looking at the 4 types. What I'm calling them is essentially based off Diane. It's kind of the more common names. We have secure, anxious, avoidant, which we just kind of call avoidant. We have anxious resistance, which is essentially anxious, and we have disorganized. So with secure, these children explore the environment. They essentially put moms and kids in labs and just said, let's observe them and do different things and see what happens. Kids explored the environment. They cried when mom left, and they stopped when she returned. The avoidant usually ignores the caregiver or the mother. They're uninterested in the room. They don't necessarily explore. And what was interesting is with these kids is that the mom would leave, and when the baby wouldn't cry, and when the mom would come back, the baby would still be like kind of avoid them. But as this study went on and they learned how to put in EKG monitors onto these babies' heart rates or kids' heart rates, they still had a really intense physiological response. So they thought these babies were just disconnected and not physiologically responding. They were like, well, they're just numbed out. The interesting thing is they're not numbed out. They're having just as high heart rate, if not more, than the anxious type, but they learn how to control it. They learned how to like ignore and pretend like they weren't having an internal response when they were, which is fascinating that a child can do that. Anxious, these babies are just stressed before the mom even leaves. And the babies had so much distress that they just stopped the study. They were like, it's not ethically safe to cause this distress to these babies. And then disorganized didn't emerge until 1986. And these are people with like, it's really disorganized and it's really inconsistent. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So secure. Securely attached people grow up with plenty of love and support from consistently responsive caregivers. So it's like if you have responsive caregivers, you're going to feel more secure. These caregivers maintain attunement and connection to their child. They're responsive to their needs. They are fine. Like if their child goes off and explores a little bit, they're okay with that. They're like, yeah, go explore. They actually encourage that. Say the child goes off and explores and falls down and scrapes their knee, the mother will come or the father will come. They respond to their cry. That's a huge thing, is they respond to the cry. They're comforting and consoling them until the child feels calm and settled. And they're like, okay, no, go play it. Go play out again. Go off on your own again. These children learn how to comfort themselves as they grow, always knowing that they have a secure base. Always knowing that like what they're learning is like, I can be secure on my own and I can be secure with my caregiver. I can have both. They know that their caregiver is not going to leave. They know that that secure base is there, that they're not going to be abandoned or hurt. And what's really interesting about secure is like when you look at a baby and a child, the secure is like, because I think people think as like they read this comfort children and they're exploring them in response to the cry. But what's really interesting and what develops our secure attachment is the coming and the going. The coming and the going. So you interact with the baby for a little bit, you're looking at them, you're loving them, and then the baby needs a minute alone to be in their own space in their own bodies, and you need a minute to be alone in your own bodies. And then you come back together and you do some more eye contact, and then you have a little bit of separation, and then you come back together. So it's this like wave of connection and exploration. Connection, exploration. That's what's leading to the secure attachment for children. So I don't know if you guys can see this. So secure attachments in adults. This is what it looks like in adults. Longer term trust in relationships. There's emphasization on protection, safety, and empowerment for both people. We know when to give space and when it's time to reconnect. So it's that like, let's explore, let's come back together. Let's be independent, let's be co-regulated. We honor that both needs and the needs of their partner. So it's like, I have different needs than my partner, he has different needs than me, and we honor that. We both have a strong sense of self-esteem and respect the others. Feel comfortable sharing feelings, engage healthy social connections that maintain the relationship boundaries. In this day and age, there's actually a good book, I should find the title. So it's really common. It was more common to have in the United States a traditional marriage, female, male, right? That's obviously changing. We're starting to get into more open relationships and open relating. Pans relationships, transgender, bisexual, like all sorts of different relationships are unfolding in this day and age. And just because, say you have a relationship, I actually know someone, the two women are married to men and have children, but the women have a relationship. So they're like co-coupling, but not co-coupling. And they like tend each other's kids and do all sorts of stuff. But they're maintaining healthy social connections. They've set up rules and regulations and guidelines and boundaries that work for them within this dynamic. So it doesn't just have to be two people. Attachment can look very different in many different ways with relationships. Seek to initiate and repair and accept repair attempts. Like, this is when you go to someone and be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. And the person receives it and you can talk about it. Playing and laughter is huge. Lots of playtime, lots of laughter, compassion, lots of compassion. Considers their partner in a positive light. So you might hear, sorry, my dog is licking her foot and I want her to stop. Don't do that. You might hear partners talking and you could be like, oh yeah, I have the best partner in the whole world and he loves to do this and he likes this and we have so much fun together, and they talk about him in a positive light versus like, oh yeah, my partner's okay. Or like they talk shit about him to the girlfriends. It's like, that's not secure attachment. You know, as a secure partner, that you deserve respect and that you don't settle for bad or poor or negative relationships that aren't feeding you. So avoidant, people with this attachment style have a tendency to keep intimacy at arm's length or to diminish the importance of relationship. So how do we get avoidant? I think you ignore the child's cry. So in the previous example, the child goes off and explores, scrapes his knee, and the mom doesn't respond, the caregiver doesn't respond. They see that the parent's not responding and the child begins to disconnect, self-soothe, or they start to learn my needs aren't important. This is huge. This is where they learn like my needs don't matter. I shouldn't even have needs. This happens because mothers, caregivers are absent, unavailable, physically or mentally ill, incapable of meeting the child's needs. So this can be more neglect, but maybe it's just because of their own attachment style. Maybe they have to go to work all the time. Maybe they travel or they're just away. These children mostly learn that if they need anything, they have to attain it for themselves, and they start to feel guilty. Now, something interesting here to think about is, I think another way that's not on this slide, children develop avoidant personalities, is helicopter parenting. So these are the parents that, so instead of the coming and the going and the coming and the going, these are the parents that are like in the child's face all the time And it's so uncomfortable. And whether it's consciously or unconsciously, the child is going internal to like escape the constant helicopter, or they're going internal and hiding their needs or meeting their needs themselves because that external caregiver is too overwhelming to their system because they're almost so anxious. So it's another thing I think happens with avoidance. So these people build walls. You don't want to get hurt, so why even have a relationship? What's really interesting about the avoidant personality is they are really focused on themselves, about what's going on in their own world, how they are feeling. It's really hard for them to step into the other person. Perspective taking is really hard for them. They have difficulty maintaining eye contact, difficulty expressing needs, search out faults, like they're constantly looking for things that are wrong in the relationship, really strict or unrealistic boundaries, purposely choosing another, like someone that doesn't have secure attachment, knowing that the relationship will fail because it's confirmation bias. One night stands are a lot of short-term relationships, like anything to avoid commitment. You send a lot of mixed signals. You avoid emotional closeness. Essentially, you're self-sabotaging intimacy, closeness, walls. You idealize. You dream about your last partner. So even though your last relationship failed, you're like, oh, my last relationship was so much better than this one. This guy sucks compared to this, compared to my last one. There might be actual stress when you're with someone, like you're actually really uncomfortable because that intimacy is too much. Difficulty relating to others and dismissing emotions. A lot of dismissing emotions because it's that perspective taking just isn't happening. They have a really hard time understanding what's going on with other because they're so into themselves. And I don't mean that poorly. Into themselves is like, that's not a horrible thing. I think what I've learned the most from these studies is like, this is what's going on in their neurological system. Like, this is the way that they learned to survive, was to kind of only come into their own world and just be with themselves. Ambivalent or anxious. So people with ambivalent attachment adaptation deal a lot with anxiety about having their needs met or feeling secure or being loved or lovable. So might seem annoyed or put off by the child's needs for soothing. They might scold the child. So this is the child that goes off, scrapes their knee, and the mom is like bugged that she has to stop what she's doing to go soothe the child and take care of her scraped knee. The other thing that happens is considered on again, off again. So sometimes the mom is like so into the child and giving her everything she needs and loving her. And then the next minute she's scolding her or ignoring her and not giving her the attention that she needs. And so there's inconsistency. That's the number one key for anxious, is the inconsistency. So it's like, there's an over focus and then and then an unpredictability. So it becomes unpredictable. So people with anxious tend to ignore their own needs and become the caregiver. So these are the situations where the kids kind of became the caregiver for the parents. And it can actually feel smothering to the parents sometimes, because the kid's anxiously like doubting on the parent suddenly. And then the mom's like, why are you smothering me? Get away. So it's creating that cycle even more. The other way you can become an anxious attachment style is maybe you're put in a really emotionally complex situation before you're able to understand them. So that's a little bit my situation. Already dealing with how I was raised with my mom was very inconsistent in the coming and going. So the thing about the anxious is that it's like, you don't know when you're going to get the love. So I'm sitting here waiting for the love nonstop, like just waiting. And when I get it, I'm like, yes. And when I don't, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me? That's the anxious personality. The other piece to this development for me, and I just like to give examples, and you can start to think about your own lives. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and I became the emotional caregiver for my father. So I was put into a way too emotionally complex situation at 12. Like, that just shouldn't have been happening. And then my father started dating and all these things. So it's like I was already on the anxious, and then that just reinforced it. So you have a constant need to connect with people because you just don't know when you're going to get it. So you're constantly just like wanting to connect, feeling insecure when the partner is absent. You might be feeling undeservable or unlovable. Well, my partner's absent because I'm not lovable. This is people pleaser syndrome. There's very little attunement to your own body and your own needs. You're constantly thinking about the past. You often overgive and then get resentful because your partner's not overgiving like you are. You keep score. Well, I did this and you didn't, and then I did this, so I'm overgiving, and then you're mad. Total fear of abandonment. And then we find ways to make it happen by just blanking that term. Fear of abandonment, low self-esteem, low confidence within the relationship, fear about your partner leaving or losing your partner, feelings of anxiety, feeling like you can't live up to your partner, and unconsciously smothering your partner, which then in turn pushes them away. And then you're getting confirmation bias of like, well, I'm not lovable. Look how much I'm giving. So yeah, I think that's all I'll say with that one. And then last we have disorganized. So disorganized is kind of new. And I think it's something like this number's growing. Something like 30% of people are now considered disorganized. They get stuck in a threat response or swing between avoidant and ambivalent without much an identifiable pattern. So these are people you're like, wait a minute, a second ago you're avoidant, but in this moment you're anxious and I can't figure out how the fuck is going on. Like, how do I even read you and support your needs? Because you're osculating so much. So this usually happens because a parent is threatening, scary, or unsafe. So there's this weird duality of needing the parent for safety, and at the same time, their parent is really scary. Because they're children, the only secure base is the caregiver that's abusing them. So like that gets mixed up in the head. So rather than comfort, they're faced with the situation that the person expected to comfort them becomes threatening. And what can also happen is like a little bit same with the anxious, but like in one moment, the caregiver is like super loving, and the next moment they're like, what is wrong with you? So there's this like the child can never create a secure base. This spills into adult relationships. It's like people with disorganized, they can't feel into, like, of course, 1 minute they're avoidant and 1 minute they're anxious because they don't know what safe is. They don't know what safe is, and they don't know how to read their own bodies. So these people experience fight, flight, or freeze a lot. They block intimacy. There's a lack of presence, of like being present. So this is everything we've kind of studied. You can see why if someone's stuck in their fight, flight, or freeze. There's no impulse control. They might have flashbacks or experience or relive their traumatic experiences from childhood, easily startled, huge fluctuations in mood. Like 1 minute they're fine and the next minute they're screaming. 1 minute they're like, I love you. And then the next minute they're like, I fucking hate you. It's a really difficult, it's hard to have relationships with these people. It's totally doable. Or they can just check out because that's the safe place to be. So it's that fine line of like, is someone in trauma or is someone have a disorganized attachment style? Or is it both? So a few things to remember, and the reason why like I was saying, I chose to study attachment styles with Diane is that it's not black or white. Things change over time, and you can have different attachment styles depending on the person you're with. Like, I could have the most secure attachment style with my partner, and then I go hang out with my mom again, and I'm thrown right back into avoidant, or I'm thrown right back into anxious, depending. The most common are anxious and avoidant, and usually the most common pair in relationships is the anxious with the avoidant. Very rarely does the avoidant have a relationship with the avoidant. Sometimes the anxious has the relationship with the anxious. Sometimes that they usually break up. It's usually a very chaotic, or this is like the super, super codependent couple that never does anything with anyone else anyway, because they're so into each other in their own anxious worlds. But what we see the most is anxious with avoidant. So then you have a clashing of styles. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about this next week, but just consider that anxious is anxious. You're on more. The big takeaways is that the focus is on other. So the anxious person is always thinking about the other. Most therapists, clinicians, nurses probably have more of an anxious personality attachment style because we're thinking about other. We're waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And what fixes this, like what moves us into secure, is feeling safe and feeling reassured. So it's the partner that can text you and say, thinking about you today, love you. However, the anxious is with the avoidant. The avoidant is not sitting there going, I need to text my partner and tell him that I love her today, or vice versa. The anxious might text the avoidant partner and be like, thinking about you today. And he's like, or she's like, God, why are you smothering me? So it's like this huge disconnect. So one of the best things, if you fall more on the anxious attachment style, is we anxious attachment people have a tendency to forget the good moments. We have a tendency to not remember the good times or the loving connections and bids from our partners. So with your clients, because anxious personalities also are the ones that seek out therapy more and coaching and are willing to kind of work on their stuff. So most of your clients are probably going to fall in the anxious. So it's interesting if you start to bring them into the present awareness and they're like, my partner never does this, and my partner never does this, and my partner da 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 da. And the interesting thing is to actually question that and to be like, is that true? Like names, and start to guide them to start to recall moments that probably happened that day or like yesterday where their partner actually did do a bid for connection with them. Obviously their partner can be an asshole or like a disorganized, and we all need to break up with partners at different times. However, the anxious personality often forgets bids for connection and connection. The avoidant is off more. The focus is on self more. They're unaware of needs, and they often appear upset. To be upset if other people even have needs, like totally bugs them. They're not soothed with contact usually. And so the number one takeaway for this is that they need time to shift from an internal place to an external meaning with their partner. So they also get overwhelmed easily. So an anxious person could be like, oh, let's sit and talk about it until everything's fine. And we could talk for hours and hours. And the avoidant is like, I got 5 minutes until I'm overwhelmed, until I'm done with this conversation. And so this is where we have to be explicit, small increments, and scheduled times, which my partner and I will do. And he has learned to say, recognizing now that he has needs. He did not used to even recognize he has needs. Now he knows he has needs. He's started to learn how to talk about his own body and be like, I'm getting overwhelmed. This conversation needs to be done now. And I've had to learn to say, great, calm your body down. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Small increments. So the other thing, the big thing for avoidance, like I said, is they need time to shift. So this is the partner that's on their cell phone and you go to talk to them and you're talking to them and they're texting, or maybe you do this and your partner comes and talks to you. And then this person, if I'm the one on the cell phone and this person is like, why aren't you listening to me? I might not even be aware, seriously, that this person is trying to talk to me. Whether it's a cell phone or I'm reading a book. So you have to have that moment to pull them out of their own world, to bring them into connection, into that space. And that can change everything. So I'm going to stop. It's a lot of information. I'm going to open it up for questions briefly. I'm always happy to stay on longer. I think next week we'll get into a little bit more about, just briefly, about working with the two personalities coming together. And kind of get into some ancestral stuff as well, because that's kind of like the next trauma piece, is how we get our ancestral, our traumas, epigenetic traumas, and what to do about that. So, questions on today. There, go ahead, Paige.
Do we have a copy of the original chart that you had on the styles? I can't remember which slide it was. It just basically had the list of this and definitions of the styles in our materials.
The PDF will go up into the portal for sure. I also will send a link, and if I can link the actual PDF, I will, of the quiz I have my clients take. And you guys can go take it too, just to see. And it's called the short form attachment style. So you can just go take the quick quiz and figure out what attachment style you are.
Something interesting that happened in my last relationship was, because he was so anxious, it actually it like magnified my avoidant characteristics. So I wouldn't normally say like I'm 100% avoidant. I would, if I took a quiz even, it would say secure, but with some tendency towards avoidant, coming from a big family where it was hard to meet all the needs of the kids. So I just find that interesting that you can shift one way or another depending on who you're with and their attachment style. You can be pushed in a direction.
Totally. And Diane's the only one so far I know that's saying that. And she even says, when you take this assessment, think of one person. So if you think of your partner while you take that assessment, it's going to give you a different score than if you think of your mother. Like, I'll tell clients, like, think of your mom and take this assessment and send it to me. Depending on what we're working on, right? Or I'll be like, think of your partner, take this assessment and send it to me. You can have completely different scores.
Well, yeah, because each relationship in our life that we have is different. So you could have a different dynamic within each one, right? So with your parents, with your child, with your lover. So maybe, I know people that we've become a generation of taking tests and assessments now, but I think it's useful.
I think it's useful too. Like I said, I usually have clients take this short assessment just to give me like a base understanding. And also, and we'll talk about this more about next week, it's like it kind of guides how I'm connecting with them, the language I'm using or how much I'm pushing them in therapy is going to be really different if they're an avoidant to a secure versus an anxious, if it's one-on-one treatment focus. Yeah. Do you guys know off the top of your head, have a sense of kind of what you are big picture spectrum? Like I said, I consider myself more secure with a tendency to fall into anxious or a past habit pattern of more anxious, or like my childhood pattern is more anxious.
I know that I can tend to the avoidant, especially with an anxious partner.
Mm.
However, like I'm kind of, it's a little confusing to me to review everything because I do have traits in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe it's useful to know where most of your traits lay. Because I do all of almost every behavior that you read through at some point.
How could we not, right? Like relationship is can be so complicated.
But what if I had a thought? What if, because we do have this cluster of behaviors, what if that does lump a lot of people into the disorganized category? That's the thought I had today.
It might. Disorganized is a little bit more like pendulum swinging with the same person, versus it's like, well, with this person I'm more avoidant, this person I tend to be more secure. And you'll see the assessment, it gives you a number for each category, each four of the categories, so you can kind of see where you fall. Yeah. All right.
For me, I'm a reformed avoidant, and then the last 2 times I've taken it's been secure. But I know my parental is absolutely avoidant.
Yeah. Yeah, and like just from what you've said, Crystal, just from kind of knowing you a tiny bit, maybe more from like the helicopter parenting versus would you say that's true?
Dismissive, actually. Like mom was very like sweep everything under the rug and like didn't actually acknowledge things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like if they did helicopter, it was like very surface level and didn't dig into anything, and it was just this like, we're gonna check on you, and also distrust of like my decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So every time I've ever quit a job, they like freak out. So imagine me telling them that I quit my corporate job last month. That was fun.
Yeah. Where do they live?
They're still in Hawaii.
Okay. All right. Steph, do you ever feel like you fall somewhere?
I want to take the test because I could see, like, as each one you're describing, I was like, oh my God, that's it. And then you describe the next one. No, that's it. Oh, I'm curious to take the test and see. As Crystal just said, I don't know, I feel like Crystal, you and I might have a lot in common. I will say I am ready to just quit my job. And I have, as you know, from my breakthrough, the other session we had a couple weeks back, I've actually identified one of the things I think holding me back is telling my parents I quit. I came to that discovery on my own, and when you just said that, I was like, yes, that's part of why I haven't quit. Like the fear of having that conversation is just like, I can't do it. So yeah, I'm gonna take that test. I'm gonna, like, not today. I think that my mind's too clouded. Give it a couple days, and then I'll come back to you and tell you what my score was.
Awesome. Steph, one thing that might benefit you is to do what I said, take the quiz twice. Like do it now with your current partner and do it now with your parents in mind.
I think it'd be very different.
And see, actually, I would love to know if you're willing to share next Monday. Yeah. And actually, I would love it if by next Monday, everyone takes the quiz And you don't have to do 2, but I think Steph, that would be good for you. And just,
I agree. I think it would be.
And Steph, I'll tell you, I mean, I just barely even switched into telling them I was doing coaching, which confused the crap out of them. So I decided I was going to like just keep it super high level. Because I tried to explain masculine and feminine energy to my parents and it just like went totally over their heads.
Yeah.
But even then, the only reason why I ended up telling them as soon as I did was like literally every conversation we have is this superficial, like, how's the weather? And then I realized, I was like, shit, I just bought a house. I'm gonna have to give them my new mailing address. So that's the only reason why I told them when I did. And like, I wanted to be like, well, guess what, guys? I quit my job. I did this thing. I have this money. Screw you guys. And then like my partner's like, be a little bit gentle. So I was like, okay. Like, so I was like, I was just like, hey, this is what you need to know. I quit my corporate job. I bought a house in cash. I'm moving in a month. I am financially secure. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I do not need you guys to worry or be concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good thought, a good tip, advice. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you need anything else, hit me on Voxer, but yeah, happy to pro tip on some of
Thank you.
they're still probably freaking out on the inside, but I can't be concerned about that.
Well, and that's just it. And I hope my parents live a nice long life and knock on piece of solid wood here. They're both very healthy. So it's like, I think I got to quit this sooner rather than later. And as I'm starting to identify the things that have stopped me, that was a big aha moment. And now it's going to be overcoming that. So maybe I will hit you up for some.
Yeah, again, it was one of those things where I was like, I already hate having to have superficial conversations about the weather, but then having to worry about what the weather was going to be in Portland versus being in Austin. I was like, I can't. I was like, yeah, let's just get out of the way.
it's interesting too, because at least Crystal, your parents sound avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that in mind, it's like they're the ones that you have to give very small information in very small chunks,
Mm-hmm.
very like can't do a lot of deep emotional processing at once. And it's like that's what has changed. Understanding attachment styles has changed for me is once I recognize what the other person is, it almost creates a tiny bit more compassion for my parents because I'm like, oh, you're this style, which means I can't communicate to you like a regular person. I do just talk to you about the weather. And then I take, and if that irks me and that bugs me, my sister actually really struggles about that with my dad. It's like, that's then what she can take into her own processing and take into therapy and process like, yeah, because that sucks. Like that sucks that that's all we're talking to our parents about. And because they aren't necessarily ready to change their avoidant attachment styles, right?
Well, I told you that story that like basically I overheard my parents talking shit about me on the phone, like because they forgot to hang up the phone.
Yes.
And so then like I didn't talk to them for 3 or 4 days. And then the next very first thing in my mother's mouth was, how's the weather? And I'm like, really? I was like, okay, this is where I learned avoidance. Like, like I had that like moment. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
We're just gonna,
Yeah. So I'll put the quiz up in the portal and I'll have everyone do it. I'll send a message to everyone and let's come next week. We'll talk about this a little bit more and how to start to communicate with others according to their attachment styles. And then last question, I'll let you guys go. So we have 2 more weeks with level 1. If there's something burning that you want to dive deeper into or have questions on, send me a message and let me know because I'll make sure to address that in week 8. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.